Hello, we're back, and now we're working on Chapter 2. This is the second week of class, and we're managing to get this far, which is wonderful. And the topic for this chapter is one of the structures of the MVC, the key structures of that architecture, which is the controllers. And it's a very important one. And the major topics are the ones listed at the top there. One of the biggest things that you're going to see here, what the controllers do, as part of what we talked about in the previous chapters, help to hijack the URL. And you're going to see that often what you're thinking is a folder call inside the application structure really is going to be a call to a controller and then to a method within that controller. And it's kind of fun. The code that we're going to play with in this chapter isn't very complicated or anything. That's not really the point of it. It's really more to show you how it works. And then if you, whatever complicated or pretty or silly thing you want to build with it, you go for it. Then it's just a matter of your logic that goes with it. All right. The main point of the controller is really to kind of accept that page request that's coming from the client. So if you think about how we use the web, we sit down at a machine, we pull up a browser, and then we either Google something or we have a link to something and we go there. Once we're there on the site looking at the page, typically at some point we will interact with it. At the very simplest, what you do with a web page is you look at it, you read, and you hit the back button and get out of there. That's probably the simplest thing you do. But more often, if you're going to a site that actually does something, you're going to be interacting with the screen somehow. A button press, a mouse click, a form entry, a registration, a login, something, a shopping cart, whatever that happens to be. In an ASP.NET MVC application, the controller is the component that receives the request from the page and then figures out what to do with it. And it does so programmatically. And that's really kind of the key takeaway there. The URL gets hijacked, as I said, by the controllers and really the architecture. And what do I call it? Hot wiring it, basically, to make it behave in a certain fashion. The fun thing is, if you ever look at these little asides that the author puts in, this is actually a pretty good one. I'm not going to read it in detail to you, but I do want to explain some of the key things here. The one is what I told you before. MVC's been around for a while, and it came about when they first started working on GUIs. And much to most people's not knowing, the original GUI interfaces were not created by Apple or Windows. They were created by Xerox. Yes, the printer copier company. And what they did, and you can see in the second paragraph there, Xerox actually developed a full GUI operating system with a mouse and all that, point and click and drag and drop and all that kind of stuff. But they didn't kind of know what to do with it. But they had developed a new type of programming. And the new type of programming was called event-driven programming. And when we're working in the .NET environment, that's a lot of really what we're doing. It's not a top-down programming logic. I mean, there is some of that. But more than that, it is we set up the interface, and depending on how you interact, that's what triggers the code. It's not like it's just reading top to bottom or running a loop or an if statement. It's a little bit more involved. So it requires that user interaction. ASP.NET kind of, when it went to its web forms approach, that form of event-driven programming really was kind of happening on websites really more with JavaScript, trying to emulate what real applications were doing. When we started adding server-side code, that's where the event-driven power really, I think, got unlocked. The beauty these days is, as you're going to learn in your web program, is that JavaScript now is also becoming a back-end language, through Node.js and a couple of other things. So it really kind of has blossomed, but that really kind of borrows from all these original GUI event-driven concepts. So go ahead and read that section. I think it's pretty interesting. And if it trips your imagination or fascination in any way, I always encourage people, You want to know more? Read up on it. Read up on it. The fascinating things as consumers of graphical operating systems, I want you to think really carefully, especially if you're like more in my age category, like when you first started seeing GUI operating systems and using them like on a regular basis. For most people, it will be either I got a Mac back in the 80s, and we're talking regular Macintosh, because that was the first consumer graphical operating system, and that's 1984. It's a really long time ago. And it was very revolutionary, way ahead of its time. It took the Windows world. I mean, they tried through the 80s to do stuff. They had Windows 1 and Windows 2 and Windows 3, but it wasn't until Windows 3.1, which was like around 91, 92, that kicked in. And for most people, they weren't even introduced to computers or internet until like 95 or after. So very kind of fresh concepts in the psyche of the modern world. People that were in tune to the Macintosh thing were kind of a little bit more on board with it earlier. But they didn't invent it, Xerox did. They just borrowed the ideas and ramped them up. All right, in the previous chapter, we talked about this sample application, the NBC Music Store. Once again, they have a link to the website right here at the top of the chapter. You can go out to the site. I did point out that I have all the NBC Music Store build videos that I did out on YouTube. Please feel free to explore those. Try it if you want. But it takes you through a complete build of the website. So what I'm going to do is, it was kind of entertaining, like during the break, should I find the last version I did and bring it up on screen and launch it and run it? I'm like, oh no, I'm going to try this in 2019. I think the last time I did it, it was in 2015. What might break? And I don't want to spend my night doing that. So I'm going to go with the screenshots that they have here of the application. If you were to build the application in its entirety, this is basically what it would look like. You would land on the home page, and on that home page there'd be, it basically, they have it in a Bootstrap format here, but it would basically be something that looks like this. On that screen, they'll have all these, kind of the banner, and then a bunch of different albums that you can click on and get more information on it. So one of the things that you are able to do in that is you would, let's say you're looking to buy a record, right? So you might go to the store menu, and then from the store menu you select a category. Now what's really fascinating about all this is not just what's on like the graphical part of the screen, but take a look at the URL once again and look at the URL structure. So there's a store, right? Remember, not a folder. That's our controller, the store controller. Browse is a method. The genre equals jazz following that question mark, and if you guys are familiar with PHP programming, you guys will know that when in PHP, if you did a post off of a form or a get off of a form, you guys familiar with those sending methods for HTTP? If you do a get, gets are always in the form of plain text, and that's basically what we're seeing here. You see question mark equals genre jazz, and really what we're doing is we're sending a parameter to the method browse inside the controller store. It has nothing to do with file and folder structure whatsoever. So they're trying to show you a correlation here, and that's one method to do it. Another thing you could do here is if you were actually shopping, you might find a record, and you can go in and look at details on the record. You see the application's fairly empty of content, but the whole point of building it is to give you a structure within which you could build an e-commerce site, basically the startings of an e-commerce site. So this is one of the products in there, and it would hypothetically show a picture. This is a blank sample screen or whatever. List the artist, the price, and of course the add to cart button so you could attempt to buy it. Let's say you went ahead and actually started picking out products because you just love buying vinyl or CDs so much, and you can go back and actually look at your shopping cart. So the application build would do all of these things, all using MVC. Notice that They provide a checkout button, and then the album names are linked, so you could go back and look at the details again, or you could trigger it to be removed from the cart, as you would kind of anticipate. If you went ahead and did the checkout, then they would try to get your payment and shipping info. That's another pretty normal thing. Nothing particularly fancy here, but it gets the job done. And of course you put in all your stuff, you hit the button, and notice that they have a promo code of free, because we never actually integrated payment systems into it. But if you were really building an application like this, after you built the structure of it all, your next step to actually do the payment processing would be to integrate a payment system. It is not something you would code. Whatever your credit card provider or gateway service that you're using would give you the API to integrate it to your system. So it would take whatever data you collect, feeds it into their system, probably through a series of database connections, and then once it processes the payment and the card's valid, it'll go off to a server somewhere, process the payment, and then once it's complete, it comes back and says complete, then you can ship the package out and make your customer happy. The other part of the site, of course, is the administration area. So you could log in as an administrator, and you could go in there and add albums, delete albums, change the prices, add more details, change the images, and it gives you this beautiful listing. And this listing is driven by the model. So there's a table in the database somewhere that holds all the album information. The scaffolding that goes with the MVC architecture, when it created this particular page, also created the ability to do all the edits and adjustments in all these tools here. Those are not coded by hand. Those are coded automatically, just like the application that we just built. Scaffolding makes that happen. It's a beautiful thing. All right. Now that you see kind of what that application does and how it behaves, that's kind of the crux of it. When I would sit there in class, like if we were to do this in class using all the hours that we have available to us, we'd probably spend half a semester building this, step by step. That's about how long it would take us. As an experienced developer, if you know what you're doing and once you get how it works, you can probably knock out a project like this in a week of like regular work days. Maybe less, depends on how, who's helping you. That's part of it too. If you're going solo though, then it creates some issues. Now we're at the part where we're actually going to do the work that's involved in this chapter. So part of your homework is to complete these tasks. Now, I kind of already screwed up, remember? When I created it, I forgot the unit tests for one thing. But that's not really important here, just so you know. So we're going to attempt now to do the tasks that they have here. And I have some complaints about this book, frankly, in terms of these things. Because sometimes they're really good about like labeling steps, and then sometimes they're kind of like not. Okay, so my job is kind of to help point you through that. Okay, and I know you guys are smart enough to figure it out, but you know what? Sometimes you aren't. or if you're like me, you're in a hurry because you're under pressure and you overlook it. So don't feel bad if I'm pointing out something that you might have missed, which is the reason why I go through these things in class. All right. So it says, before writing any real code, let's start by looking at what's included by default in the new project. Well, let's keep in mind here that I started recording this video. In the previous video, we were finishing chapter 1, and I had created it, and I still have Visual Studio up and running with the project loaded. In fact, it's still loaded in the browser, right? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stop it. If you don't have this open from chapter 1, open up chapter 1. Okay. Now, I feel obliged, as I always do in these classes, to make sure that I give you this little lecture, which I'm not going to follow for myself. It's a best practice. Whenever you're working on something for homework and you're building upon what you did previously, what should I do?
Check if the previously built stuff is okay.
Yes, absolutely. Make sure the stuff you're building on works. That helps a lot.
Make a backup.
Make a backup. And really what we call it is versioning.
That's the word I think
And one tool that people do use, professionals, is they'll use tools like GitHub or Bitbucket or some of those services. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. The most popular one, of course, is GitHub. Microsoft now, of course, has kind of bought it, which is a little scary because it's an open source repository mostly, but I think it's kind of interesting. Now, the way that I version my work, I'm going to show you how I do it, but I'm not going to do it, okay? I store all my stuff where I think makes sense to me. So I put it all in my Google Drive out on the cloud, and I have a folder for this class, I have a folder for this semester, and here's the thing. So let's say that's the version that I had already completed. It's not up and running in Visual Studio. Before I would begin working on Chapter 2, just to be safe, and you know what? You should always be safe, all right? You should make a copy of this. So this is the primitive brute force way to do it, but you know what? It works. You just right-click, copy, paste it back into the same folder, and then when you paste it back in, add to the file name a descriptor indicating when the last save was. So I might say MVC Music Store, whatever it says, Chapter 1, complete and working, or something like that. And then I go back to work on the one that I already have open. The whole point is I don't want to lose anything I'm doing. And anytime you achieve anything major in an application, you should stop, save, and version. Because it's when you forget to do that and you've done hours of work, that's when it will guarantee to fail and you will lose everything you just did. And then good luck remembering it, and that's the problem. Now, there are some ways now, even inside of Visual Studio, that you can live or auto-save your work. And it all happens through GitHub, and there's a couple of other tools that happen too. But I just want you to be aware that you need to do that. Don't get caught in the situation where you've been working on one version the whole time, something goes wrong with your computer, you'll lose all your work, files get corrupted, whatever happens, and then you're kind of SOL. Now, the other thing that I'll tell you guys is this. Some of the work that we're going to do in this class builds upon the previous chapter. Some does not. It's not like the first course where all of it was like one big thing, and versioning was very critical. However, when you turn these things in, I always strongly recommend that I only ask for screenshots, really, as proof of homework completion. You show me your code, show me it running, but then I also recommend that you zip up your folder and upload that too. And that can get a little cumbersome because some of these can get pretty big, but sometimes they're pretty manageable. And then with that upload of the zip, you also have a backup there. If you don't want to zip it and upload it, well, zip it and put it in your Google Drive. Do that. You know, do something to make that safe copy. Okay, back at it. And I think our first instruction here is to basically look at the controllers. I'm moving the PDF off to the other screen, and I'm going to be reading from it, but I am on the top of page 39 right now, and that's kind of my pattern is I'll call out the page numbers from the physical book and the ones embedded in the PDF. They just happen to match. Sometimes PDFs don't, though. So, all right, so on page 39, they want us to go to the controller folder, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to open that up, expand it, and notice that we already have a couple of folders or a couple of controllers in there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the home controller and just take a look. I'm going to close the output window and just create a little like visual space here so it's easy to see. You'll also notice that I tend to run my fonts kind of big in Visual Studio. Like you might not have them this big on your screen. I do that a lot because I record. I also do this a lot because I hate hurting my eyes. I don't really see any point in that. Never strain to look at your work. If you're straining, it's wrong, period. If you want to turn on line numbers, do you guys know how to do that at this point in Visual Studio? And if you don't, basically you just go to your options, find the, Where is it? Oh, there we go. Text editor. And somewhere here, maybe I got to expand it. Okay, under general. Okay, there we go. All languages. And right here, you can turn on line numbers. I just recommend that because here's what happens. With MVC applications, they get complicated. And then when you start to run them and try to build them, it'll start throwing errors at you. And then the error output window, it's going to list file, line number, column number. So you know exactly where the error is happening. And really, if you got a file that's maybe 100 lines long, you don't want to be counting down to line like 83, right? And believe it or not, in the past I used to sit there and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, you know, I used to like do that to try to count because some of the primitive editors didn't have line numbers in them. All right, just a helpful tip. All right, you'll notice first of all that we are dealing with a C# file for a controller. It's not an HTML file, not an ASPX file or anything like that. It's a straight up C# file. As is typical for most C# files, we have import statements up at the top, and in C# we call these using statements. That just means it's pulling in different system libraries with different capabilities. Another thing that's really common in C# these days is the fact that we create namespaces for the things that we're working with. So all a namespace is an encapsulating piece of code structure that allows you to uniquely identify the stuff that you're working with. So think about this. If I had a solution that I was creating and I had more than one program in that solution, it is very possible that my second solution might also have a home controller. This allows me to uniquely identify this home controller from any of the other home controllers that might be embedded into my project. So if I wanted to fully qualify and call it, I would actually say MVC Music Store _ 419.controllers .home controller. That would be like the full call to it with the namespace. Remember, unique identifiers is what it's all about. Does anybody know what this colon means?
It means it's child. Or
Yes, you're on the right path. It's a child because the child inherits from the parent, and what it's saying is the home controller extends, using the Java terminology, or inherits from the controller class. So the controller class has certain things that it does automatically that we can pull in all the capabilities by just adding that colon and that. Did we create this? It was created for us automatically. Notice as we peruse the contents of the document inside the public class that we have 3 different methods predefined. And notice the names of these methods. The first one's called index. Okay. The only directive inside of it is return view. We have another one called about and another one called contact. What does that match up with? Well, the home index, right? About and contact pages that we saw with the application running in the last chapter. That's what it is. Is that what generates the menu items? Well, not exactly. But it is waiting for the user to click on home, about, or contact, which sends to this controller. The thing coming in from the client says, hey, I clicked on about. Where are you going to take me? So if I clicked on about, it would come here, it would look for the about method, and it would say, well, view bag message. Okay, that's like a weird razor syntax, but clearly it's some sort of a variable we're storing into, right? And what we're going to do is drop in a string, your application description page, right? And then it returns the view. Okay, what view? Okay, you should be asking this in your head. What view is it really returning? Well, there is a views folder, right? And if I go to the views folder, you guys are going to notice that in the home folder, there's an about page. that has the actual code that's going to go up on the screen. So it's going to return the view associated with the method inside the home controller with the same name. Okay, so you're starting to see that connection? And what we have going here right now, it is very simplistic. There's not really a lot of code or mystery here. There's no real programming logic, just a string and a variable and return a view. That's all that's happening. All right, now the first step at the very bottom of page 39 is they want us, it says replace your application description page text, which is this, in the about method with a phrase of your choice, like I like cake. Well, I personally like M and M's because I have some sitting on my desk right here. Okay, just some sort of text. All right. Silly as that is, let's save that. Let's go ahead and launch the application again. Now this is the second time we're launching it tonight. Maybe first time for you guys watching the videos, but second time tonight we're launching it. And since we already did that, some of the binaries that get compiled on the backside will compile much faster because they've already been done. Certain ones don't change. The only ones that are going to get recompiled are the ones where the code changed. And there's one C# file we changed with a little bit of text. So this should launch, you know, like 5 minutes faster than the last one. Hopefully. And of course, when I say that is when the computer decides to go slow. But I'm not going to pause the video. Sometimes I'm tempted to do that. I just want you to see how long it's going to take. Now, one question that people have about this, and like the server side of this, is like, so every time somebody goes to my page, you have to wait this long? No. Because once you get the application up and running on the web server, guess what you do? You leave it running. You're not relaunching it every time. It just stays up and running. The only time you're going to relaunch it is if the server goes down. It is taking a while, though. I know what's making it take so long is the authentication system. So, look, Brenda, it looks like yours came up a whole lot faster than mine. Right? And for those of you watching the video and yours has already popped up already, which might be all of you, if you now go to your About page, which you should see the new message that you just typed in. If mine ever loads, we'll see that. Did everybody manage to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And all of you got it on screen already, and here I am still sitting. Okay, that's great. You guys take it on faith that it worked? Okay, because I'm just going to go ahead and kill the browser right now, because I don't want to wait. All right, let's move on to the next step. You notice at the bottom of page 40 that they do have this little box talking about like the development server thing that I was talking about before. Kind of a little bit of a tip. All right, so step 3 has you load the site. Step 4 has you navigate to the site, and then you see whatever message you typed, and that's all good and wonderful. And hopefully that worked for you. Now we move on to the second part. The second part is creating your own controller from scratch. All right. So we are at the top of page 42 right now, and it says we're going to create a controller to handle URLs related through browsing through the music catalog. This controller will support 3 scenarios. The index page that lists the music genres that your store carries. Clicking a genre leads to a browse page that lists all the music albums in a particular genre. And clicking an album leads to the details page about how to get information about a certain album. So the first step is to create a controller. Now controllers can be created in a number of different ways. because this architecture is kind of the convention, not kind of the convention, it is the convention for MVC inside of ASP.NET. To create a controller, we go to the controllers folder, right-click it, choose Add, and then you'll see right at the top, it recognizes that you're in this structure. So what does it tell you, top of the list? You're in a controller folder, you're going to add a controller, right? If you're adding something else, you're kind of a fool. It's kind of what it's saying, real politely. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it brings up this next interface. And here's where the decisions get a little watered down. For right now, and for many of the things that we're going to do in this course, we're probably going to work with empty ones to start with. But when we start to tie in models and database components, we'll often be shifting to other choices. Usually, entity framework for databases. If you look at like the second option, for example, it says MVC5 controller with read-write actions, right? We're not coding those, we just select it. When we choose the third one with views using entity framework, that one just allows you to pull data from a model, put it on the screen, but you can just look at it. If I go down to the fifth one, where it's an API 2 controller with actions using entity framework, well, actions, you know what that means? That means you can also read and write. But you're doing it directly to a database. This is just to give you an idea of some of the possibilities. We're going to choose empty at the top, and then we're going to go ahead and click Add. Now, here's where it gets a little weird. Do you notice it's allowing us to change the name, but it doesn't want us to change the second part of the name. It wants us to stick with a convention of keeping the word controller in the controller name. What they want us to call it is store. So I'm going to go ahead and type store. I am using a capital S. I'm going to go ahead and click Add. Notice what the box says right now. Scaffolding. It didn't take really all that long, but now in the controllers folder, we have a thing called the store controller. On the left-hand side in the code window, we have a pre-generated code page. By default, right, when we add a controller, it kind of assumes that we're adding it maybe as a menu item, but not necessarily. But it does create an index view for it by default. And most of the time when you do this, you usually keep the index view in there. Now, what they would like us to do at the top of page 44 in step 1 is to actually kind of hardwire the action method here. So first thing we need to do, and students often miss this when they're looking, they look at the bolded return hello from store index thing, but we also need to change the type of action method that we're using. So we need to change it from action result, which kind of directs traffic, to just string, because that's going to be the type of output that we're doing. So we're going to public string index. Then inside here, we're going to remove the view method call, and instead replace it with a string of text, and I'm just going to let it do exactly what the book is doing, because the book is doing it for a reason, and the reason is to show you that you're actually hitting the controller that you created. That store.index inside the string isn't going to trigger anything, it's just text. You guys get that, right? And just to reinforce it, this is just text, not a method call. All right. Go ahead and save that. Now, if you read the part above, we also have to do something else here. We also need to not just throw this up on the screen, we also need to actually create a browse method that returns something different. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a snippet of code, and if you want, if you have the PDF, you could just copy and paste this in if you want, or if you want to get that manual feel of doing it, hey, go for it. What I recommend though, and I'm going to pull the PDF back over partially so you can see me do it, is I would actually grab the comments along with it. Not that they're really required, but hey, why not? It's not going to hurt anything, and it gives you a place to put in notes. I'm going to add it right after the index method. I'm just going to paste it in. There's no flags or underlines or anything. It looks fine. And this one also is going to return a string, and this time it's just going to show us that we're hitting the browse method. Okay, back over to the document to move on to the next step. If it will allow me to move my PDF, there we go. I go from like one screen resolution to another, and it kind of hiccups when I do that. We're also going to add another method for store details that does basically the same thing. So really right now we're just doing a bunch of hello worlds. You guys catching that, right? It's like the traditional first thing you do. So we're creating another method, also outputs a string called details, and it's just sending it back text that shows us that it's getting there. Go ahead and save the work, and then go ahead and launch it. And of course, I'm anticipating this eternal application load, which has kind of been the pattern for me at least, and I'm hoping yours pops up right away. Here's the takeaway. This time, you're going to notice when it loads, you are not going to have a menu item that says store. Right? Did it launch for you guys yet? But in step number 3 at the bottom of page 44, what it's asking you to do is append to the end of your URLs each one of these. And this is where some of the magic starts to happen with the URL hot wiring. So when we add store to the end of it, it's going to go look at the store controller. In the store controller, it's going to find the index method because we're not specifying any other. So index is assumed, and it'll put up that text that I created. If I then go to the URL and append browse to it, it'll take us to the browse page, details to the details page. So I'm hoping yours is working. I'm really, frankly, pretty frustrated with how slow mine is running, which would typically cause me to rebuild the application without the authentication, because I think that's what's going on here, is it gets that whole SSL thing going in the background. And either that or this computer needs to be replaced, one or the other. Probably not replaced, but All right. And in this case, I am pausing the video. Mine actually loaded here 10 minutes later or whatever it was. And I'm going to go ahead and just demonstrate what they want you to do, which is add, store. And I want you to notice here, it really should be uppercase, right? But I'm going to just put it in like that. It still works. Upper lowercase doesn't kind of care. That's not typical for a regular application. If it was a file and folder structure call, it would fail. Then I will append to it browse. That worked too. And then I'll replace browse with details. That also worked. And the thing I said before I hit record again here in class was that when we go back a few clicks and we're hitting the other controllers, like the about controller, for example, the reason it drops into this interface is because this controller is sending us to the view that's pre-created for about. The ones that we just created do not have views. That's not the point of this chapter yet.
The reason it shows up is because it's making the method call.
It's making the method call. Right. So we're using the URL to steer the application. All right, folks. Now You know,
He wasn't-
I know Alan Pearson is standing in the hallway for those of you watching the video, so he's like making us giggle and laugh like he always does. So I'm going to get him back during break. And that, you know, believe it or not, completes much of what we need to do in the chapter. The next part of this, which is at the bottom of page 45, is where we're using parameters to control the methods as well. We have run out of time for the night, but what I know you guys are clever enough to figure this out. You can go home and work on this. When we come back next week, I will finish this up just to make sure you get the concept and reinforce it. But get this done and complete. You can always watch my previous videos for guide as well. But this video needs to end here because class needs to end here. Thank you, everybody.